last enrichment that I'm going to have to do. It's such a burden to do these. And obviously as a burden, it's about birds. Such a burden. That was for Jim's benefit. But at any rate, it's also, you guys probably were not aware that Billy Joel was an avid birder, and on his River of Dreams album, he wrote a song called Famous Last Birds. What? Yeah, these are the last birds I have to show. You don't know that song? Famous Last Birds by Billy Joel? Yes, apologies to Billy Joel. These are the last birds I have to show. That's why this took so long to write. No, it was only, well, if you substitute, I swear that's Billy's song with a little modification. So at any rate, it's about the shorebirds in the aviary and a couple of different subtitles of things that I have heard from guides quite often over the years. Why are there so many different kinds of birds in here? Or I can't tell them apart. How do I work in here? And so I want to talk about that. And the goal of this is to help you understand these birds. Lots of you have seen me use this. I love this quote from Richard Feynman about birds. Apparently he was a birder. And I learned very early the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. And I just like to reword that a little bit. He's talking about the difference between a little bit of knowledge and some understanding. And there really is a big difference. It's what I was talking about with the Risso's dolphins. Just being able to call it a Risso's dolphin doesn't tell our visitors anything. But being able to describe the behavior and what they're doing is very helpful. And so the same thing here. So my goal for this enrichment is that you will understand our shorebirds a little bit better and be able to talk with them, with the visitors about them when you're in the aviary. So what have we got here? Rockfish, absolutely. And we have spent years working with you and trying to convince you that you don't need to be able to name every species of rockfish to be able to talk about rockfish. And hopefully you have figured that out. You can, they're all the same shape, even though they have lots of different colors. So it's easy to recognize a rockfish. They have a huge mouth and big eyes. They are daytime fish. At night, they hide in cracks and crevices and try to disappear. And they are one of two lifestyles. They're either ambushers, who just sit there and wait for something that fits in your mouth to not see you and get so close that you can grab it. Or some of them are plankton feeders, primarily small jellies, like a raft of comb jellies will go by out there, or some of the little crystal jellies that we have in our exhibits. You get a bunch of them drifting by and they will shoot out and suck down all the gelatinous stuff and then go back and hide in the shadows again. And those are the two lifestyles of a rockfish, whether you can name all of the species or not. There's only one person in the entire aquarium that I think could name all 9 of these, never mind the other 20 or so that we have in our exhibits, and that's Clint Jones, and even he wasn't 100% sure what that one was, which is why I put that one up there, and because it's one of the more obscure ones that we have. And so that's the point. We all have spent years being able to talk about that dead fish on the windowsill in the kelp forest is a rockfish doing what rockfish do. They sit, right? Or they hang like they're an Alexander Calder mobile that's just hanging and swinging back and forth. So if we can do that with rockfish, let's see if we can learn to do that with sandpipers. We have 9 different species in the sandpiper family in the aviary, and 7 of those 9 species go through 2 plumages. They have breeding and non-breeding plumage, so that makes 16 different appearances that you could have out there. Learning all of them really isn't going to help you to talk about sandpipers, so let's talk about the sandpiper family. In addition to the coloration, the plumage coloration, there are 4 physical features that vary from species to species. What are some of them? Beak, the length of the beak. You can have a beak that is barely 3/4 of an inch long, or you can have one that is several inches long. Okay, so the beak length. Legs, same thing. You can have little stubby legs that barely get your belly off the ground, or you can have very long legs that lift you up quite a ways. All right, what else?
Their fluffiness.
Well, the fluffiness will change with the temperature as well, yes. But how big and how small the body is. Never mind the feathers and all. So you've got the smallest one over there is less than half of my fist size. And the biggest one is actually about 3 fists long. So you can have, and there are larger ones. There aren't any smaller ones. but there are larger ones that we don't happen to have an exhibit. So that's three things. The fourth one we almost never talk about, but they do all make, that's just for communication with each other, but for living out there visually, the things that you can see, it's the length of the neck. Some of them are built like defensive linemen. They have no neck. All right? And then other ones have a really long neck. That one, this one here, or a medium length neck. So you've got all different combinations. There's 4 different features. And in the sandpiper family, you can put those pieces together with any combination. I'm sad that we lost our dowitcher recently. When I first started putting this together, I had that picture in here, because there you had a medium-sized bird with short legs and a huge bill. So you can put these things together in all kinds of combinations, and that will help to determine how you use the land, the world that you live in. Sandpipers live on the boundary, the border between water and land. That's what they do. They really are shorebirds. That's where they spend almost all of their time, is right on the border between water and land. And in our aviary exhibit, we have 2 very different habitats that represent the border between water and land. What are they? Yeah, so the wave end and the estuary or the wetlands end. And you can find wetlands. Ours happens to be an estuary at Elkhorn Slough, but you find wetlands all up, call them prairie potholes, you call them lakes and ponds, all through fresh water. It doesn't have to be salt water, and it doesn't have to be only on an estuary. But the big difference between the wetlands and the waves crash, I like the way you said it, the beach side, is the water movement. In a wetlands, the water doesn't move. Now, our estuary is tidal, so it moves sort of. It's very slowly. It takes 6 hours to change this much, 5 or 6 feet. That's almost not moving. From the bird's point of view, you don't have to worry about the water. But if you go out on the beach side, that water's in constant movement, and even at low tide on a choppy day or a big swell day, one wave can run all the way from the low tide line all the way up to the high tide line and back down, and then 14 seconds later it does it all over again. You need to be aware of that when you're a little bird working out there and trying to find food, because if you don't pay attention, it can change very quickly. So I've got a video that I want to show you, and when I was taking this I didn't take this for the enrichment, so I was trying to get the little birds because they were very entertaining. But fortunately, there are also some big sandpipers out here, and I want you to watch the difference between the way they are behaving on the beach side. Watch, what are the little birds doing? They're running. And what are the big birds doing? They're just standing there feeding. Okay? If you are that tiny, you cannot afford to have that water catch up to you. Because if you get sucked out with it, you're going to drown. But if you're this big, you can stand, and you got long legs and you're lifted up, you can afford to have the water go over your toes and back down. It's not a problem. So they're both feeding on almost the same things, a lot of them, but the little birds are running away from the water. And then when the water goes down, they come along and pick up what left behind. They're looking for little crustaceans mostly. It can be not larval, but very tiny shrimp or crabs that are still pelagic, that are getting washed up on the beach and then left behind. And then the big birds, the other thing we talk about with the bill is that how do we talk about them using that long bill? Yeah, we talk them drilling down into the sand. But watch this again and tell me how far down those big birds are drilling here. Yeah, they're not drilling at all. And this was a revelation to me. I hadn't paid enough attention to it till I started to do this enrichment. But they're feeding right at the surface. And I got to thinking about that, and I think one of the reasons is it's a matter of physics. If you're in this habitat right here, and you drill all the way down so your bill is in the sand up to here, and a wave hits you, it's liable to break your neck. because your head is anchored and your body isn't. So they're feeding right at the surface, or maybe just below it. They may be getting some small sand crabs, like our sand crab exhibit. The littler ones, flip them over, poke and get the soft tissue out and all of that. But they're not drilling down into it. So the big birds and the little birds feeding on very similar things in similar places, but they use the habitat very differently unless...
But they also might have a long beak because their legs are long. If they didn't have a long beak,
Yeah, they'd have to bend over further. And there are some that do that, and what they have to do is bend at this joint to get down there. They have to deal with it because, remember, you can have other combinations. But watch what happens if we change the wave action. Look at even the big birds are running here. This is a bigger wave, and the big birds realize I could get caught by that. So I'm going to let it chase me up the beach, and then I'll see what it leaves behind. So they have to be aware of their habitat. And whoa, almost got me. Okay, and I got one. Look, that's a big meal for that little bird right there. It grabbed something and ran up the beach, and then follow it down, grab food, and here it comes again. So they're using things a little differently here, all right? This habitat, oh, that's my photobomb here. I'm taking pictures of this. You got a gull dragging its wing along there. I don't know if that gull was injured or not, or just being lazy, but at any rate. But the point is that some sandpiper species almost never use this habitat. They're going to be only on the wetland side, or mostly on the wetland side. There are some species, like the ones that we've seen here, that will use either side, the calm side or the rowdy side. But there are some that don't like this because of the wave action. And so that's one of the things that we can see. But let's go to the wetlands side. So here we are where the water is not moving, except for perhaps little ripples from the wind. But the water is still, here's your boundary. Here's a very large sandpiper, the same one that was on the beach in the video, but watch this. Oh! So you've got a long bill, and without a long neck on this, you can't get down into the mud. You've got to have the long neck. If you've got a long bill and a short stubby neck, you're going to feed differently because this method doesn't work. But this bird is all the way right up to here in the mud. So how is it finding the food? Can't see it. The feeling, touch. Maybe the tongue, but also the bill is very sensitive on the tip. So you bump into something, and then, is it edible? I'll take it and pull it out. And their bill works. I've seen great animations. We're not going to see this in the exhibit because we're feeding them food that's in a dish. But their bill does it opens this way like a pair of scissors, hinged way back here. But when it's in the mud doing this, again, physics comes into play. You'd be pushing along the whole length of that bill against the mud. That's a lot of muscle work. What happens is, and my fingers won't work properly to do this, but if I put my thumbs up this way, just the tip will go like this. The bill is actually flexible, and there are some muscles they can pull back, and just the tip. So you're down 6 inches down in the mud, and you bump into something, just the tip opens and grabs it, and then you pull it up, and now you can open your whole mouth to swallow it. So, and I've just seen wonderful animations of the tips of the bills on those long, the ones with the really 4, 5, 6, 7 inches or longer on some species. So that's how they're finding their food. It's not visual. In the other habitat, it was all visual. Here's the food right here. I can see what's going on. Here, not anymore. It's all done by touch, because the minute you touch the mud in this habitat, the water's black. It's just opaque. Vision doesn't help you here. So that was one of the things. Now, if you're a little sandpiper with short legs and a short bill, you're right at the border. You're not going to wade out very far because your legs are only that long. So you're going to stay right close to the border and do the same kind of thing, but you're poking down in and not nearly as far, and your head doesn't even go underwater because the water's not that deep. So you're feeding right near the surface and probing around here in the mud. Some of this is done by touch. This one right here would have poked right down in where you can't see in the mud, touch, oh, got it, and pull it up. So that's what they're going to be doing, is just poking around here. And I've got a little video. This is a little hard to see because it was such an overcast day, but there are some small sandpipers right on the border here. And if you watch them, you'll be able to see them No longer concerned about the water moving, right? So they're going to stay right here in one spot, and they're just probing and poking either in the water or up on the mud right above the water. Doesn't matter. It's all done by touch. Poke down in the mud and try to find stuff, worms and crustaceans and things living down in there. Even some mollusks that are down in there.
But
Go ahead.
they're all feeding at a different trophic level.
Sure. So the larger ones are out here feeding on many similar things, but in a different spot. So they've split the habitat up, and that's why you can have sometimes 8 or 10 different species. If you're with an expert birder that can pick them out at the distance, you can get 8 or 10 species out here, all feeding in very similar methods and on very similar food, but in slightly different parts of the habitat, depending on the length of their legs, the length of their bill, and the length of their neck. And so you can put all of that together.
What kind of sandpipers are those? Or does it?
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. We're
Big ones and little ones. Yeah,
Sandpipers.
exactly. And I'm purposely not going to identify any of the species in my pictures.
You hadn't said what they
Exactly, because that's not the point. The point is to understand the family of birds. And so, so this family of birds, you can get lots of different combinations and therefore lots of different silhouettes. If you made silhouettes of each of these, good birders could actually identify them by the silhouette because of the various proportions, length of bill, size of body, length of leg, length of neck.
I know you don't want to
Yep.
identify them by name, but what makes them all sandpipers? Why are they in the sandpiper family?
The genetics at this point will have a lot to do with it, and some of the taxonomy. Remember, one of the things I've been saying for years, taxonomy is a moving target. It's our attempt to put our categories onto nature. And so as we've been able to do DNA analysis, we've discovered things that we didn't used to think were related, are closer related than we thought, or vice versa. Right. Things that look so much like they used to be in the same group, and now, wow, DNA says these really are not. So DNA has changed our understanding of who's more closely related to whom.
But these are all genetic.
But these are all, if you look in the books, you're going to find them all under the sandpiper grouping. Even though sandpiper isn't part of the name on all of them, some of them it is. Just like sharks. Spiny dogfish is a shark, but it doesn't have the word shark in the name. So that same principle applies right here. Now there's another family of birds that we have 4 representatives of in the aviary, and that's the plover family. But look at these physically. If you made silhouettes out of these, where you didn't have any size reference, you wouldn't be able to tell which species you were looking at because the proportions are the same. We have small, medium, large, extra large. The legs get longer as the body gets bigger, and the bill gets a little longer, marginally longer here than here as the body gets bigger. So the proportions are all the same. This family is much more like the rockfish group, where they're all the same shape. You can identify a rockfish instantly. You can identify a plover even if you don't know which plover it is. And they also, for little birds, have very big eyes. Plovers are visual hunters. And I want you to watch this. So first of all, here we are at the border between water and land. Where's the water?
The tide zone.
Way back here. Well, it's way back here. The plovers are farther up the beach. They're usually above the dry line, above the high tide line, and they're feeding on insects, and they're visual predators. They're running around looking for the kelp flies. Kelp rack on a beach is a great, this is a smorgasbord for plovers because that's what they're looking for. They're not down on the waterline. That's where the sandpipers are, running up and down on the beach. But this little plover, I want you to watch this plover being a plover. This is the coolest. Watch this. It's run, stop, look. Run, stop, look. Run, stop, look. Look now. Look in every direction all the way around. Oh, over there. Oh, got one. Did you see it? Get one right there. It dipped down and scooped one up. Run, stop, look. That's what plovers do. They will do that in our exhibit. That's the plovers never stroll. They run, and then they stop, and then they look, and then they run, stop, look. You can see that behavior in our exhibit. So you can interpret that behavior with our plovers no matter which species of plover it is. They all do that. That's what they do. So they're all the same shape and proportions. They're just different sizes. And they're all feeding visually on things they can see and then run and grab. So that's a family that you can easily interpret without being able to necessarily name them. Now you put them, that was on the beach side, you put them over on the mudflat side and the wetland side, and look, here's some small sandpipers, 1, 2, 3 here. The rest of these are all plovers. And if you look at the legs, you can tell this one is stepping gingerly, this one's standing still, this one's walking. But look at the plovers. They're in full stride, head down, legs up. That's what they do, or they're standing still. Those are the only 2 things plovers do. They either run. This is a road runner here. Look at that. It's like the stop action, with the coyote out there or something. That's what plovers do. And they're feeding the same way here that they did up on over by the dunes and all. Spot a movement and bam, gonna go get it. That's what plovers do. And so you can see that on the beach, you can see that in the wetlands, and you can see that in our exhibit. This one went out in the water, probably not to get food, because there's not likely to be much out here, and it's not going to drill down in the mud the way the sandpipers did. Probably went out there just to get a drink or to cool off if it was a warm day. I can't remember how warm it was, but if it was a warm enough day, you get your legs in the water and you cool off a little bit. We all know how that works, right? So this one did not stay there long, but I did manage to get a picture of a plover actually in the water. So this family, a little more like each other and a little different behavior from the sandpipers. There is one plover that you ought to be able to identify by name, and that's the killdeer. And the reason is, this is, of all of the birds we have here, this is the one that more visitors will be familiar with than any other bird. I even had a visitor say that to me the other day. I was in there a few days ago, and he pointed at, he said, "Is that a killdeer?" And I said, "Yes, it is." He said, "That's probably the only bird here I know." And because they are found in all 48 states, they are found almost anywhere there's open grassland. They're not a woods bird. They don't go in the trees, and they don't want to be under the trees where they can't see very far. They want to be in open grassland where they can see a long way and see that predator coming to be safe from it. So that's where they are. They are not shy. They will lay their eggs wherever mom happens to be when that egg is ready to come out. They'll lay eggs in your flower garden. They'll lay eggs on your driveway. It just doesn't matter to them. When I was working at the bookstore at the University of Buffalo before I moved out here, this was a big school, somewhere between 15 and 20,000 students, and our sidewalk had a crack in it that made a little depression, and one year a killdeer laid her eggs right there in that crack on the sidewalk into my bookstore, and she yelled at all 15 to 20,000 students that came into my store during the course of that spring while she was doing that. And she wasn't happy, and I'm thinking, "Mama, this is your problem, not ours. You laid your eggs on the sidewalk." So they are not shy. And what's really fun, this is far and away the noisiest bird in our exhibit, which makes perfect sense because the species name for this, not the genus, but the species name for a killdeer is vociferous.
Oh, really?
It's Charadrius vociferus, yes. And so it is far and away the noisiest bird we've got, probably the noisiest member of the plover family. The plover family in general, and killdeer in specific, are well known. Here's their habitat, not right on the boundary. The plovers, again, everybody needs water somewhere nearby, but they don't live right on the boundary the way the sandpipers do. But the plovers are famous for this behavior. I didn't get the whole thing because it got out of sight on me, but watch and listen.
Oh yeah, here we go.
That's the alarm call, and that's the, "Oh, I'm injured. Oh, I hurt so bad I can't fly." And it will limp away and try to get away, and while the cat or the fox or whatever is following it this way, and when that predator finally leaps and the bird flies away and goes, "Nah, nah, 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 it wasn't hurt after all," you're also 100 yards away from the nest and the babies. They lead you along with that broken wing thing. And that alarm call, I've watched plovers, adult plovers that had little chicks, and they look like our little, the pictures of the baby snowy plover that's in the exhibit there. They are little cotton balls with toothpick legs. And they just look ridiculous. And they're out walking around, and when mom or dad makes that noise, they freeze and duck down. That's the alarm call. Make yourself invisible and I'll get the predator out of here. And that's what they do, and I have seen that in the wild. So that behavior is one a lot of visitors will have seen that with killdeer. I think all the plovers probably do it as much as a killdeer does, but killdeer are so widespread, everybody knows about them, and they don't realize it's a family trait to do that. But listen to this now again. You'll hear that in our exhibit. every now and then. Even though there aren't any chicks in there, it's probably a sign of a little bit of elevated stress. Maybe there's so many visitors in there that the bird's kind of thinking, and then we've got 3 more birds. I call this the outlier family because these birds are not really closely related to either the plovers or the sandpipers, and they're really not that closely related to each other, although the stilt and the avocet are sort of closely related. The oystercatcher, not even close to any. And these are 3 that look so completely different. Almost all of our guides know that, so that's why I'm talking about them by name. We know these 3. They're easy to pick out. So I just want to talk a little bit about the differences with these 3. We'll start with the stilt. It looks like it ought to be a sandpiper. I mean, it's got really long legs. It's got a moderately long bill. It's got a pretty long neck. It's got a medium-sized body. It kind of looks like one combination there. But they're not. They're going to do things a little differently. Number one, look how far out this bird has waded, right up to the belly. And let's watch how it feeds here in this video. It's going to be a little different. So tell me what you're seeing this one do. Yeah, it's picking right there, and it's visual. It didn't go down underwater the way that big sandpiper did. It didn't bury that bill down in the mud. It's picking what it sees right there, wading around in the grasses and out into a little bit deeper water, looking for movement. Movement is the key. A bug moves, a little insect or a worm or something like that, and you grab it. I've even seen them take very small fish and come up with a tail wagging like this as it goes down. And so very tiny baby fish when the fish are spawning out here and the larvae are settling out and all. So they look like they ought to be a sandpiper. As much as I hate to use the words always and never, but I'm going to say you are never going to see a stilt on the beach side. Even when you're close to the ocean, they're going to be in the slough. They're going to be in the wetlands. The beach is not what they do. They are strictly a wetlands, mud flats, grass beds, that kind of thing. That's their habitat. And then the next one, the avocet, also looks like it could be a sandpiper, although the bill here is a little weird because it curves up instead of down like some of the sandpipers do, or being straight out. They also are not on the beach. They are going to be in the wetlands. This is not a beach bird. They don't want to have the surf. They don't want this water moving any more than maybe these wind ripples, and that's it. And so we're going to watch this one and see look at where the head is on this one. Look at where the head is, and so we're going to try to figure out what this one's doing. See if you can see. Watch the butt. Every time I tried to video look, see it? They're doing the twist out here, but they always I got mooned by every single avocet in that pond out there that day. And the reason that their butt's doing this is because their head is doing this. They're sweeping that head back and forth because their bill has little hairs hanging in between the upper and lower mandible, and they are filtering plankton out of the water. They're just sweeping back and forth and getting tiny stuff out of the water. We occasionally throw a little bit of food right into the pond that's got the island in the middle of it for them to be able to get that, but most of their food here comes out of the dishes. And if you watch them, they'll walk over to the dishes and they'll do that. That's what they're doing. Even the dishes that have the black worms, the tubifex worms in it, they sweep through and grab the worms that way as often as stabbing. And then they'll sometimes take it down to the water. They want to get it a little wetter and to help swallow it, help it get down, especially if they get a mealworm or something where there's no water in the dish. The other fun thing is that we periodically throw live crickets in there for the birds. Crickets are not what they do. Crickets, if you think about it, they're plankton feeders. Crickets are way bigger than plankton, and their throat is not very big. So even swallowing the cricket, if you get it facing the right way, can be difficult. But you got to have it facing the right. Broadside is not going to work. And backwards won't work. Think about the legs of a cricket. You try to swallow it backwards and the legs become a jam-up point. You got to have it head first so the legs will go out behind it this way. And the younger of our 2 avocets, the one that has the less breeding plumage, that's the faded one, she's actually gotten pretty good. I watched her the other day take 3 crickets in a row, flip them around and get them head first and go down. And during that same time that she was walking around picking up those 3, the other one, the older one that's in the bright breeding plumage, missed 6. She pick them up, play with them, and throw it away. Nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that. They know they're edible, but it's a learned thing because in the wild, that's really not what they're doing out there. And remember, our birds, both of our avocets, were hatched in captivity. They've never had to watch an adult to learn how to do what they do. So there is some instinctive behavior in there. They do the sweeping movement, but they also, oh, that looks edible. And nope, can't get it down. And so they're not very good at it some days. And so it's worth being in there. They will even do that sweeping movement in the sand, right under the surface of the sand. And the reason is we also toss fly larvae, more commonly known as maggots, in there. You'll see the little white maggots crawling along, and they get down under the sand. So the avocets will come along and do this, right under the sand, looking to see if they can come up with something. So you can see that sweeping movement in the exhibit. That's how they would normally feed in the wild virtually all of the time. This is what they're doing out there. And then the oyster catcher, completely different, does in fact live at the boundary between water and rock, and it is salt water. These are seashore birds, not wetlands birds. You're not going to find these very far up the slough at all. For one thing, there's no rocks up there. And for another thing, it's just not the habitat that they do. You're not going to find them on the lakes and the prairie potholes and all of that. They're coastal birds. I think it's amusing that to have a name oyster catcher. I don't find that to be very flattering. How fast do you have to run to catch an oyster? If tuna catcher, that'd be impressive, right? But oyster catcher, not so much. But they're on the rocky shore, so they're not on either the sandy beach or the wetlands. They're where there are rocks and waves. And what's this bird doing right here?
He's
looking for food. Walking around on the rocks. It's low tide, and here's some limpets right here, 2 or 3. There's limpets liable to be up out of the sun. The limpets do like to be more out of sight if they're going to be out of the water. They don't want to be exposed to the sunlight and dry out. So it's looking for a limpet. And when you're in the aviary next, look at the bill on that oyster catcher if it faces you. If you were to do a cross section of the bill, it's not square. It's this way. It is taller than it is wide. So when you tip your head sideways, now you have an abalone iron. And you pop that limpet right off the rock. So you just slide underneath it, pop it off, and flip it upside down, and you just grab it with the tip, which is very sharp, and you rip the soft tissue right out of the shell. This, of all of our birds, this is the one we're most likely to see all the year. They're resident here. They're not migratory. And they are most likely seen from the deck because we don't have sandy beach right off the deck. You got to get around onto the backside between us and Hopkins to find that habitat. But the habitat for the oyster catchers is right there.
The legs are really brightly whitey, pinky. Why did I think the legs were red? I'm just imagining.
No, that's the pigeon guillemots.
I know, but they
well, they're black and the pigeon guillemots, but it's kind of pinkish. And then the bill is the one I love to tell people. Every visitor I've tried this with, it's worked. I said, you got an aunt in your family that wears too much lipstick. And they all go, oh yeah! It was Aunt Bertha for me when I was a kid. And so that's what that always reminds me. I love these birds for that reason. But they are the ones you're most likely going to see off the deck. So I hope that by being able to actually see those videos, I was really happy that I actually had videos for a lot of that instead of just still photos, that you are going to be able to understand these birds a little better and to talk about sandpipers. And don't hesitate. Birders are obnoxious people, we are. And you'll get some birders who want to know what kind of bird is that, and that's what they want to know. And it's perfectly all right to say, you know what, I'm not a bird expert. I say that about fish all the time. You can say that about birds. I don't know which kind of sandpiper that is, but it's in the sandpiper family. And here's what I do know about sandpipers. And if they really are looking to help them learn to ID the birds, that's why we have bird books. Or that's why we do have some guides and some staff who are bird experts who can help. I will fess up, there are times of the year, based on the plumage changes, that I have trouble telling the least sandpipers, the western sandpipers, and the sanderlings apart in our exhibit. And one of the reasons for that is that our birds who are not exercising, you talked about your exercise program, they're not migrating and they're not running up and down on the beach to get their food. We have several species of birds that are considerably more amply endowed than wild ones would be. And so the shape is wrong. And so especially our western and semi-palmated sandpipers look a lot like sanderlings to me because they're a little chubbier, and I have to look twice and oh, no, that's... so it can be tough even for somebody that is a birder that gets out there a lot. So if you can't identify them all, don't worry about it. You can still talk about sandpipers and you can talk about plovers.
With the oyster catcher, I'll often tell people that they can, when they're walking along the path, you can often hear a really sharp call, and if they look out, that's the bird that they'll see sitting on a rock.
And
often
she will do that in the exhibit as well.
Often two of them. Don't they mate?
They mate for life, and they tend to travel together, and they tend to talk to each other the whole time they're traveling. Yes, they're very chatty. Yeah.
What family are the last three?
They are each different family. I called it the outlier family because they're not really related to any of the others, so I grouped them all and I made up an artificial family. They're all outliers, yeah. So there you go. There's a little bit for the aviary that I hope will help you be more comfortable even if you can't identify them all. In fact, I wouldn't worry about identifying them all. So.
Real quick question.
Sure.
The standing on one leg.
Yes.
I've heard several different stories about that. What is the official story?
Oh, it's all warmth. Look at what parts of their body have no feathers, the legs and the bill. When they sleep, what do they do with their bill? Turn it around and tuck it under your wings in the back. You do the owl thing and turn your head 180 degrees and hide your bill. You hide one foot up under the feathers because you lose heat fastest where there are no feathers.
I've also heard that it's easier to get up to a running start if you're standing up versus sitting down with predators.
Well, you don't, so you don't need a running start, you need to fly. And the issue is, now think about what you just said. If you are sitting down and covering both legs at once, you have to stand up before you can fly. That split second can cost you your life. But if you are standing like this and your wing, you can just, boom, you're in the air. You don't need to put this leg down first to fly. That split second, that's a theory. There's no way we can test that without sacrificing a whole lot of birds to predators.
I always use the flamingos because they're going down to the watering hole and they're all standing on one leg.
Yep.
So when a lion comes down, you know they're all taken off.
Yeah, they're all going to go in the air without having to put the leg down. But if you're laying down, you got to get up first. And that's probably the difference between life and death. Ours do regularly, especially under the heat lamp. They got warmth and there's no predators. And it doesn't take them long to be in there to realize nothing ever comes around here. So if I sit down, I'm fine. And so
That's unusual.
that's fairly unusual behavior in the wild. See, you can go out on a day at high tide when there's no mud habitat for the ones that are feeding in the mud flats. You can go out and look through the pickleweed, and they're all standing in the pickleweed like this and with their head around like this, and you can just have hundreds of things like godwits or willets or whatever out there. And that's what they're doing, standing on one leg, because if you lay down, you could get taken. Whether that predator is a ground predator, like a fox or a cat or something like that, or a falcon. Either way, you need to be able to get away. Now, if it's a falcon, taking off might be the worst thing you can do because it can come around and grab you in the air. That's the way the falcons hunt. But your instinct is just take to the air. I'm safer that way. So, all right, let's. You got a few minutes to relax, and we'll get you across the street as soon as we can. Come on.